Hello and welcome. I've just finished a delicious meal of very plain rice, but with delicious dal and some garlic curry. I know we spoke about garlic and the do's and don'ts as far as monks are concerned, Buddhists in general, but in this tradition it's part of our staple diet, also for medicine, an antibiotic, natural antibiotic, but for me very tasty in a pleasant way. And I don't ordinarily speak about sensual pleasures, food, and all of these wonderful things and experiences I could share with you. Because after all, I'm not making travel vlog videos here about Sri Lanka. It just happens to be where I am staying for the time being, practicing this Noble Eightfold Path, to give up, or renounce, I should say, let go of most of those sensual desires we take for granted, to expose the very nature of what causes suffering, what causes that desire at the root of this greed, hatred and delusion, fueling so many of the problems we all, or humanity, in fact all beings, on this beautiful planet, which has more than sufficient resources for all, still there is immense competitiveness, struggling and suffering, as we can all witness. Now, I don't see the news or media in general, but I don't need to. Last time war was breaking out, that I heard it was in Ukraine from some Ukrainian friends, Kalyanamita, Upasikas, whilst I was in India. But probably wars have come and gone and still breaking out, as they have done for time immemorial, forever, as a result of these defilements, greed, hatred and delusion. Until we're all free of those, there will always be suffering. Another Uposita has passed in the last few days, the full moon of June, which here in Sri Lanka is occasion for yet another holiday, having just had probably a week of celebrations for Wesak, the full moon of May. Now the full moon of June, they commemorate the arrival of Buddhism in this country, in Sri Lanka, and the various legends associated with that, albeit it's come and gone since then. This is a big and significant day of celebration and national holidays, extended over and still ongoing, I think, a week length period of time. And I continue with my stay here. That full moon of June meant that I've been here for now 8 months. I'm into my 9th month here. I did nip out of the country briefly for 3 days to Thailand, and only in that 3 days, and for 3 days after my surgery that I had at the beginning of my time here, and then recently 1 day when I had a problem with my ankle, a wound that wasn't healing, again because of the damp, the wet. Other than those few days, every day in this time, this 8 months, I've been on my daily Pindapata alms round from where I stay here, through the village, into the nearby town, to the other side. That is about 3.6, I say about, I looked it up on Google Maps, so it's not very approximate, it's quite specific, 3.6 kilometers. And then I walk back. Originally I used to walk a circle, so it was about 4.5 kilometers, because I'd walk one way there and a different way back. But recently I've been fortunate enough that most people recognize me, offer me a lift, bring me back in a tuk-tuk, one of the local tuk-tuk drivers, so I only walk one way, so I take a straight route. But on the occasions when there is no one for my return journey, I walk back the same route, because otherwise it's a little bit too far to carry everything, to go a different route at that stage. And I noticed in this holiday time, as is often the case when there's Poya Day, this is what they call the Uposatha here, the town, the village is quite quiet. The houses I pass are quiet because many people go away. They go to the holy sites here. On this occasion, to the mountain place, the Anuruddhapura city town pilgrimage spot. I haven't been there yet myself. I find these places rather busy, but because people are going there or visiting family, friends in other places, everywhere is very, very quiet, and I'm back to walking the return journey. And I noticed that very quickly, even though I'm still walking at least 4 kilometers really every day, by not walking the 4 kilometers for the return journey, having started that again for this last 3 days now in a row, if not 4, I have got quite sore feet, which surprised me because I'm still walking around in bare feet everywhere all of the time. But my feet, my soles of my feet, have quickly adapted to the shorter journey, as I'm sure they will quickly adapt to now the longer journey. But it made me appreciate the advantage of having that lift back each day. Also, it doesn't stop. When I return, new people are coming out of different houses, adding to the load that I'm carrying. And because I'm no longer that new here, there are quite a few more people. There are some that have come, some that have gone, but it's quite a lot to carry back also on your own. It's how I injured myself and had to have surgery in the first place whilst I was here. But the other thing I noticed is with regards to food, is that I got used to, over a 3-year, we get used to things. Our bodies, our tastes, we acclimatise to both the good and to the bad. When in India, for most of the 3 years I lived there, I wasn't in the monastery where we were very well fed. If ever I want fattening up and to go for a sort of a nutritional holiday of a physical nature, go for getting some good home cooking, let's say, apart from of course going back to my mother's house or something like that, I can go to my monastery, my Sangha in Bangalore, southern India, where they have wonderful people cooking, including some of the novice monks, and wonderful offerings of food. And I do really enjoy and appreciate Indian food of all kinds. But I got used to mainly not living in there, just living on what they call prasad, which is plain rice, a very thin version of dal, so more like watery dal soup. And that was it, each and every day. And occasionally, very occasionally, there would be some vegetables thrown into that dal soup, because I was relying on not alms round so much, but going to Hindu temples being offered prasad, which is their food offering for people on pilgrimage. It's an honour to receive that offering, but also it was nutritional, if not very, you might describe it as boring, each and every day, the same thing for 3 years. But I was always hungry. And when you're hungry, you do always appreciate it. Here I don't go hungry. I'm very well supplied with food, as I've spoken of before, on my Pindapata. But it does change over these holy weekends because people have a longer time to go away. So apart from there being less people, the extra people that come out and replace them are often offering this milk rice, which is something they like to offer monks here. It's not, as you might think, it's more of a rice cooked up with coconut milk, and it sounds quite delicious, but personally I find it a little bit rich and too much for a meal. I'd rather have a bulk amount of plain rice than. You can't eat much of this very rich version of, you kind of make it into a mould. It's kind of, I can't describe it, but personally I don't like it really. So there's a lot of this, and it just comes with just some very hot chili paste. And this, in terms of nutrition, isn't ideal, I don't think. And the fruit markets and places were closed. So for the last few days, I haven't had my usual very well-balanced diet. So this is why I noticed what I'd come to become accustomed to and got used to had gone away. And it's when things go away we notice them more. So I'd got used to having a different selection of things and such a wonderful choice. And then for 3 days, that hasn't been there. For 3 days, I've had to walk all the way back. And for 3 days, there's not been a lot for me to choose from in my bowl to eat. Until today, when everybody's returned, and I had way too much to even carry, but I still had to struggle back, walk back. I'm not complaining. In fact, I'm grateful to have that opportunity to recognize how well supported I am all of the time, 99% of the time. And even as well in these few days with people's kindness and many offerings. But of course all of the same thing. They have a sort of what would you call it, a tradition of what they offer at these times. So you get a lot of the same thing. So that is why I opened this little talk with my exclamation of food enjoyment and satisfaction for having had some bananas, some mango and some garlic, as well as plain rice and dal and some good vegetables today, which is my ideal combination. I shouldn't say things like that, but people here don't watch this. If you said that to people, that would soon become less than ideal, because that's all you'd get also. So this is partly why we have this little rule. Part of the Opositories, we recite the Patimokkha rules, not if you're on your own like myself, but I reflect on them all. And our training rules, our Patimokkha rules, our precepts as a monk, there are 227, include that we shouldn't give requests or express preference for this or that or the other, or that we don't like something, and just accept what we're offered and appreciate the generosity of that dana, that giving, and give all the opportunity to give whatever it is they have. That has the effect of giving everyone that opportunity, but also you getting a balance, a naturally, organically selected balance of food that may change from time to time, but never just becomes one thing because you mentioned it once to be your favourite. Whether that was the basis of the rule, I don't think so, but it does work out, as many of these rules do, to be very practical in the way, in the results. Karma, vipaka. Karma is actions, vipaka is results. So the negative results of saying, I really like, let's say, sticky rice and mango, which I do, would be that you'd only get sticky rice and mango from here on after, and that would soon become something you don't like. And if you said you didn't like something, again, that might not be too much of a problem, until one day maybe you either change your preferences or your body needs something. Sometimes we eat foods that your body needs as opposed to what it's your preference. But this life as a monk, but also extending that to lay practitioners, if you are practicing the Noble Eightfold Path and are Buddhist, or you're just interested in hearing about Buddhism, either way, of whatever faith or background or religion you are, we can all find out how to be happy. The Buddha actually taught us how to be happy. There is much focus on the suffering, the cause of suffering, or even suffering, the end of suffering, the cause of suffering, and the path leading to the end of suffering, the Four Noble Truths, is translated as suffering. And this can sound negative. But this is not the Buddha's teachings. The Buddha's teaching was suffering and the end of suffering. He said, I'll teach just this one thing, which actually is two, suffering and the end of suffering, with the emphasis being it's one thing because it's on the end of suffering. He taught one thing because he was teaching us not, obviously, he wasn't going to teach us to suffer. So that's just the context for what he's teaching us. He's teaching us how to end suffering. So we don't cause ourselves more suffering by renouncing worldly life, becoming monks, having many rules to abide by. That is to bring about happiness, joy and contentment. Primarily contentment. This is where happiness results from. If we are content, we will feel naturally happy, whereas if we're discontent, we'll feel naturally unhappy or sad. So we see and we can experience, as with my little extra suffering I've had today, or the last few days, of some maybe less choice of food, and actually consequently less food, because I really couldn't eat much of this. I can't eat that kind of rice. I find it very could never say that because it's a very auspicious thing to offer monks here, so you can't say you don't like it. It's disrespectful. But if you don't like something, you don't like something, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if it's all you have, you can't still eat a great deal of it. You can eat enough, can't you? And I'll never starve because I eat once a day. Okay, just this once a day, but you can eat enough in that time. But normally, with it balanced out with some food, and some chickpeas are a great thing that I get here, which I think offer some good protein as well. Without that, one can feel like, oh yeah, I'm suffering a little bit now, and I'm having to walk all the way back, so now my feet are sore. But without that experience, which has come about through something being taken away, as opposed to me letting go of it, giving it up, renouncing it, for a short while. Without that, I wouldn't have recognised how good it was before. And it just brings that back into focus. But it also brings into focus the characteristics of existence, of course one of those being suffering, dukkha, but the first of which, anicca, impermanence, is that, well, this happens every Puya day, every full moon. Not with the dark moon here. They don't use that apposita as something to have any special occasions on here. They just have the one apposita, or the Puya day. But I follow my Sangha back in India because I am part of that Sangha, albeit living here remotely from them. I'm responsible to them and they're responsible for me. Anyway, it's interdependent, the relationship. And this being the last full moon before Ashala Puja, which is the full moon of July, means that when the monks met in my Sangha back in Bangalore, I wanted them to have at least the opportunity, as well as the next Uposita, the dark moon, to be able to answer my request, which I've put in formally to my Sangha, my brethren in India, that I may remain to stay here for the upcoming Vasa, which begins on the full moon of July, Ashala Puja. It'll be another holiday here, but I'll explain about Ashala Puja when we get there, rather than to take up time on that now. But it marks, which is of equal importance, it marks the beginning of the rains, or the entering of the rains retreat. It is actually the monsoon season already here, and will continue through the next 3 months from the July to October, when monks stay in one place. I hope to stay here, but have to formally require a request of my Sangha for permission to do so, just in case they have somewhere else they want me to be. So, although I'm alone in solitude, as sometimes people remark upon, I'm not without a Sangha and that backing. And also, I am to some extent, well, I am fully duty bound to them. It's like my head office, my bosses. It isn't, again, it's not a restrictive, like our rules, it's not restrictive, it's supportive of my practice. And this is the only way we can see it. But also, when we become monks, when we become nuns, as well as relinquishing material things, we renounce a lot of that decision-making aspects of our lives. We can't just decide, I want to go here, I want to go there, travel and do this. After a certain period of time, as a bhikkhu, you can become more independent, but even so, you still want to stay dependent on your mother Sangha, if you like, where you were ordained, where you originate from, where your teachers are, and where there are people there to support you, even if not materialistically, spiritually, and support you in your practice. So they are your family, your support group, and your noble kalyanamita, your noble friendships, all practicing the same thing, but also of more experience than yourself, having brought you into their lineage and ordained you. So that request has gone in, and I'm sure, I hope that it will be okay for me to remain here through those coming months. We then fall back into the realms of comfort again. As, say, if we're suffering from a little illness, we get better. We, for a little moment, think, oh yes, I feel better, it's good that I'm not ill again. But it's for a moment. You soon forget that you were suffering, and you just then carry on as normal. So reflecting on aging, reflecting on sickness, and ultimately death, which is the result of the causes and conditions of birth, that is, aging, sickness and death. Reflecting on that is another very valuable part of the practice. Not, again, though, to look at it as a negative, but as a positive. That whilst we are able to practice, this is the time to do so. To evoke urgency in what we can actually enjoy at the moment, whilst we aren't suffering too much, hopefully. But even if you are, to some extent you can still practice to the best of your ability with what you have, the resources that are available to you physically and mentally now, because they probably won't improve, they will probably just get worse. So now is always the time to practice. Not, I'll leave it till tomorrow, I'll leave it until I'm older, because then you might not be able to. If we don't develop these skills now, we don't develop ultimately what we wish to try and develop, which is equanimity, then when the problems do arise, they really do become more of a problem. So the development of equanimity comes about through this discipline of practice, of us keeping sila, the moral precepts, practicing meditation, and developing wisdom as to not only the characteristics of existence, impermanence of everything, the unsatisfactoriness of everything, this not-selfness, that we're not this body, this physical body, or even this thinking brain, just these are the results of the causes and conditions we've put in place. Coming to understand this fully, these aspects of existence, and the practice we need to do to recognize those fully, but also work with those, not fight against them. Don't try to make permanent what will never be. All conditioned things, you see, are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and out of our control. So don't try and force things to be different than how they are. We accept them as how they are. And this is how we develop that equanimity, through acceptance rather than expectation or resistance. It doesn't mean where sensible, where wise, where wisdom is there, it is appropriate to not do something that might be of harm to yourself or indeed others, to avoid that, to leave it alone. Or where aversion, disliking towards something is there, it is usually a warning sign that it is perhaps, even with people, someone you might not like is possibly because they're not behaving very well, and they may not be good company. And the Buddha indeed did say, you know, we develop wise friendships, so it's okay to avoid unwise company. When we renounce worldly life, we give up a lot of what you have in worldly life, which is choice, by the fact that we're not asking for anything. We're living on what is given to us, right down to what we eat each and every day, of course what we wear or where we live, all of these things. But we become equanimous, we develop equanimity towards whatever is offered, through the understanding that that's being offered with loving kindness, with metta, out of compassion, karuna, for the condition we're in, and it gives people immense joy, which we can appreciate as mudita, which is the opposite of jealousy, if you can understand. It's mudita, is the Pali word for sympathetic or empathetic joy, joy for others in a way, that they're having success or they're gaining happiness from giving to you. So this renunciant's life, giving up so much, you're gaining so little, because that is all of those Brahma Viharas, those qualities we develop of metta, loving kindness, karuna, compassion, mudita, joy for others, and this equanimity, through and as a result directly of renunciation, letting go of something. And this is how the Buddha taught us to be happy. Not necessarily for lay people to have to give everything up, all that they enjoy and all that they own materialistically, and live an ascetic life. No. As long as they appreciate it all as impermanent, that they cannot hold on to it, grasping everything to remain as it is, including their own physical well-being, which is of course destined, will deteriorate. You will get sick, age and die. Trying to think or convince yourself otherwise is attachment to something conditioned that is very fragile indeed. It's attaching to a bubble that can burst at any moment and bring immense suffering. So freedom from suffering comes about through the either realization of the impermanence of everything we have, but then still being able to enjoy and appreciate them, or by the very renunciation of them all. and then through that experience understanding that contentment actually, as I came to find out in lay life at first, through gradually letting go of each and everything I'd had, or all of the things I'd had, you come to realize that acquisition is actually fuel to the suffering, whereas the renunciation of either material things or ideas, in fact, opinions and views, is very much a cause and condition for contentment to arise. So you may have experienced, and I can't think of a good example, but when you have been holding on to something so long, and one day you just have to let go, and as terrible as that might be at the time, when you are forced, I mean, this could come as a result of, for instance, a relationship with another being who dies, gets old, gets sick and dies, whether it be another human being or a dearly loved pet. You will be devastated. But underlying that, very often you can recognize, for whatever reason, there is some sense of relief. And it is recognizing this sense of relief which is where we find that foundation, that basis for contentment. So just the simple example of my sore soles of my feet and my little bit of a hungry tummy for a few days is also recognition that still I have sufficient, I have enough. And before this time, I've had a lot less and still been okay. It's been enough. And this just reinforces that foundation for contentment to settle on. It brings down the barrier, the level. In fact, eradicating, hopefully eventually, expectation. Expectation is such a problem in that we get used to what we are continually receiving and appreciating, yes, but sometimes after some time appreciating less so, just getting used to, taking for granted, until it's gone. So when it has gone, you suffer more. So we must always be reflecting on that impermanence. So however well things are going, without being negative, you can have even a plan B. Well, you're following plan A, this route, this is what's happening in my life at the moment, it's going well. But by recognizing, rather than expecting that to continue, and recognizing that it will not continue under any circumstances, all conditioned things are impermanent, even if it continues until your last breath. That last breath is its cessation. So at some point it will end. Understanding that, knowing that, is the cause and condition for the arising of contentment, even in impermanence, even in suffering, even in the uncontrollability of life. So all ordination is, becoming a monk or a nun is, or even going to live in a monastery as a layperson is a further step towards just, well, let's cut out the time wasted in coming to realize that and just get rid of everything now and find the contentment in very little. In little sleep, little eating, little talking, a lot of meditation. Because in meditation we can find joy, we can find rapture, we can find bliss, happiness, tranquility, all of these other superlatives, but ultimately we will find a nothingness, an emptiness, a natural state of being, a clear pool of water. We can use all many analogies, but something that is not conditioned, is unconditioned, and therefore deathless. A purity, a clarity, a calm. This is only found in samadhi, in meditation. But it's brought out, this cool, calm pool of water infiltrates everything else in our lives, but only when we recognize it in samadhi can it have the opportunity to, through seeing clearly, which is what vipassana translates as really, seeing clearly. It will infiltrate its coolness, its calming qualities throughout everything else, all of our daily activities and experiences, whether as monks, nuns, laymen, laywomen, it doesn't matter. The practice of samadhi will result in not only clarity of an intellectual nature and understanding, but in clarity of feeling, that we can enjoy what is nice, as I enjoyed my meal today, but without attachment, being able to know and let go. Know that perhaps tomorrow that won't be what I get, but tomorrow maybe there'll be a lift with a tuk-tuk. It's always changing. Nothing needs to be expected. Then there isn't so much disappointment, is only because of expectation. Without expectation, there is no disappointment. So this is how the Buddha teaches us to be happy. But with, as you will see and witness on the particular holy days, wherever you are, on celebrations in the temples where you go to. I've heard a lot of reflections in Dharma talks recently, where there have been many anniversaries and things, of the old established, monasteries first establishing themselves in different countries outside of Thailand, and monks going to Thailand 50 years ago, 40 years ago, even 30 years ago, and the ascetic nature of that practice then. And it's talked about now like in a legendary way, as something exceptional. But of course, this is coming from a place of relatively now extreme comfort, if you like. But if you look at the way people live in poor places in the world, there are poor people everywhere, wherever you go, even in the richest cities, there are the poorest people. They are living now like that. They may be living in simple little concrete empty buildings like this, which has been made the best of to accommodate me, but just enough. Or they may not even have that, maybe living under a bridge in a city. And this is what the Buddha taught monks to live like. An empty building like this, under a tree, in a cave, under a bridge. And these have become a little confined to what we call the Jutanga practices, the 13 ascetic practices the Buddha allowed now, because he also said also in a community, in a monastery. But as soon as you have a community, anything more than 1, 2, 3, 4 monks and upwards of that, in my own monastery there are, usually in the Vassa they try to have about 108, which will include nearly sort of 20 or 30 bhikkhus and sort of 70 odd samanera, novice monks, all in a very beautiful temple, monastery accommodation, right in the heart of the city, but peaceful, calm, all living in harmony and peace, supporting each other in their practice. You'd never know. You're in a community of 108 people, let alone the majority of those, the novice monks being, young teenage boys, anything from the age of 8 years up to the age of 20. You'd think it would be quite a raucous environment, but no, it's very peaceful, very quiet, in the heart of a very hustling, bustling, busy city, the main city in southern India. Yet there's peace and tranquility there. Why? Because they're practicing the Noble Eightfold Path. They're keeping the precepts. And this supports them in all living, how? Happily. I was listening to my teacher there talking yesterday and corresponding with him briefly over this Vasa matter. The first, despite the complexity of what he was talking about, that I wasn't so interested in. What came across was that he was so happy. And that is because he's so content. By no means are they living in luxury or anything like that, or a great deal of comfort. The novice monks are in a dorm of 10, 15, if not 20, in a room, in bunks, barracks, if you like, but all getting on very harmoniously, calmly and quietly. Now why? Because they're content. It's enough. And they do have very good food. I did mention I'm missing their good food. But it's good here also. So it's just it's like home cooking to me, having it been my basis to go back to every 15 days was a good fill-up. So although I lived on rice and dal for 3 years, every 15 days I went back to my mother monastery for a good fill-up, where I'd probably have breakfast and lunch, all before noon, of course, but 2 meals, just to really give myself some extra nutrition to go out for the next 15 days and survive on just rice and dal water. So these things we come to appreciate, these simple things we come to appreciate, are very much more easy to maintain than the complexities we build up around ourselves. And that goes not only for lay people in our own lives. I know my life became complex. I had built up lots of things I came to rely on. A nice house, transport, business, friends, social life, all these aspects which seemingly supported and I needed. When it came to the crunch, I didn't need any of them. Because when they were gone, I was still the same. Albeit, perhaps, a struggle at first, it soon was a relief. And that's where I found the contentment in renunciation. And then found myself looking for more and more I could let go of and renounce. When you first get a taste of renunciation, when you can realize how actually easy it is to give up smoking cigarettes. I used to smoke so much cigarettes, rolling up cigarettes like this. Never was I not rolling them up. I'd roll up 12 or so in advance so that I always had one in my mouth and I wouldn't let them go. Even though I was a businessman, I used to roll these things up. Didn't look right. I had to sort of do it in secret because otherwise I was smoking cigars. Never was I so relieved when I no longer had to do that. Renouncing, it was not giving up to me. I was a smoker for 20 odd years, plus more than that probably, heavily. And just one day I thought, well, how would I stop doing this? And I realized, well, you just stop doing it. And it's the same with everything. Yeah, you might have some physical, I will hasten to add, with people with any physical addictions, like you can have with alcohol or drugs, you need to take medical advice, don't just stop. One must put that in and make a mention of that. But I just stopped because I thought, well, the way forward is to see this as a bonus. I don't have to now go and buy the tobacco, buy the papers to roll it up in, to do the rolling up and to do the smoking, have the thing to light it, and earn the money to pay for all of that. If I just sit and do nothing, it solves that problem. And it was a little bit difficult at first, but I got used to it very, very quickly. And from that came relief. And then I was looking for something else to give up very quickly. And, you know, I went through everything. I went from, it was meat, I think, first, alcohol, then smoking. Then I took 8 precepts and was then not eating in the afternoons. And of course that meant giving up entertainment, which was, I think, perhaps by far the very hard, not television so much, but music was probably the hardest, because that remains with you for such a long time in your head, even to this day. But even that can become, if now a tune comes into my head, I just let it, and it soon becomes very uninteresting and fades away again. But if you let it come into your head and you think, oh yes, I like that tune, and then you think of another one to replace it, then you become entrapped again into that cycle of addiction, in that case with music. And that's the same with any addiction. You just don't see it for what it is, you see it for something you have an opinion on. You make a judgment. You see it as something you like and you want more of it, or you see it as something you don't like and you want less of it, and you get something else to mask the problem if you can't get rid of it. And this is the problem we have. If you see it for just what it is, wanting to have a smoke, wanting to listen to music, or hearing some music in my head, it's just that, then it becomes just that. Let it go on, loop the same tune. It will soon go, because you'll no longer be interested in it. And you sense such relief from this, as such an experience of freedom, liberation, in letting go, in renunciation, that you want something else to give up. And then that positive cycle continues until you can live with so very little and be content with so little, just enough. And this is how the Buddha taught us to be happy. But you'll always see communities of monks and nuns or monasteries and people in lay life still will build bigger temples, more accommodation. Of course they're growing, they need the support. But naturally that will grow, but all things are impermanent, and the inclination often is for those to then break up into satellites and big organizations. And when you have big organizations, you can subsequently have the inherent problems that goes with those, whether they be religious or not. Organized religion is, you know, one of the big problems in the world, without any doubt. Less so in Buddhism. This is just an opinion, but it's evident from my experience as compared to other large religious organizations, because of the nature of the precepts and the nature of what the Buddha was teaching us, which he was not teaching us to believe in anything other than ourselves, to solve our own problems, and to keep a moral code, to do no harm to others, with a view to reducing greed, hatred and delusion. Now with that undertone, there only can be, as I've experienced and is evident if you go and live in some of the very large communities of monks. Of course I've not experienced nuns, but monks in the Buddhist tradition, where there are some, if you go to Nepal and places, there's big monasteries full of many monks, they do live in such harmony together. But also, as in Catholic communities of monks, similarly, I have experienced that peace, even in large numbers, that can result from that harmony of living together in accordance with a code of practice, moral precepts. So I've, on that note, got through another Uposatha into the 9th month here. This is the longest I've been in one place since before finally leaving the UK in 2020. Prior to that, I was living on outside. I wasn't in a fixed place, but I was in the same location, much like this really, but for 3 years. But since 2020, I don't think I've actually spent so long in one place, apart from the odd few days going off to the monastery and back or something like that. And here I went to Thailand and back all within 3 days, so it doesn't really count. Even during the Vasa, you're allowed to be away in case of emergency for 3 days. Well, it's 3 nights actually. So it doesn't count as being away. But I shouldn't have to go anywhere. Hopefully I can stay here, and I'll confirm that nearer the time. Many more talks in the meantime, and I will keep you updated. I've got so many comments and questions which I appreciate, and tomorrow we will go through some of those, talk about some of your comments and your questions, and continue with that. But until then, I hope there's something useful in here. I hope you can practice to be happy, not make your life complicated, not to gain some qualification, but to just gain some contentment, and then you will be happy, like the Buddha taught us. But if there's not, let it go, ignore it. Until next time, be happy and stay well. Sukhi Hotu.